Hey there, I am Alex aka Mont, and this is my review of Metal Gear Solid 5 The Phantom Pain. This review is for the PlayStation 4 version of the game, which I picked up from Amazon. As time of writing, I've put around 70 hours into it. This review will contain no story spoilers and hopefully no real gameplay spoilers. The footage will be of missions that don't really reveal anything too dramatic. That out of the way, a little quick background information. I've played Metal Gear Solid 1, 2 and 3 through to completion. I've watched all of 4 and played a little bit of Peace Walker and Ghost Babel. Oh, and Revengeance and Ground Zeroes, if they count. So I would consider myself fairly well versed with the Metal Gear Solid universe. For those of you who don't know, Metal Gear is a long-running stealth and tactical espionage game series that is focused on stealthy gameplay and very complex, not to mention bizarre narratives, and this is likely the last entry in the franchise for the foreseeable future. So let's get on with the review, shall we? As per the norm with my reviews, I will start with the negative aspects and then move on to the positive. The negative aspects then. The parts of the game I either did not enjoy or feel could be vastly improved upon. And there are two main gripes I have with the Phantom Pain. First up, the open world aspects to the gameplay. Much of the advertising surrounding MGS5 is focused on the fact that Metal Gear goes open world, but that's not inherently a good thing. Making a game open world does not necessarily mean the game is automatically better, and in the case of MGS5 I'm of the opinion that the open world not only fails to add anything to the game, but that it actually takes away from the overall experience. There are two large sandbox open world areas in MGS5, Afghanistan and Central Africa. Throughout these areas you will find various enemy outposts, bases and the like, and you're typically free to approach them in any way you see fit. That's fine, that freedom enhances the gameplay, but the problem is, these bases and outposts make up a very small portion of the open world, so what's the rest of it? Answer, nothing. There are deserts, valleys, plains and rocky steppes and even some little jungly areas, but there's nothing there outside of the occasional animal. The world is largely empty. Take this for example. Let's say this beautiful picture is Afghanistan. The red circles are unique enemy bases, the blue circles are smaller outposts that generally seem to be copy-pasted. If you've seen one, you've seen them all. Which means that all of this is essentially redundant. There's nothing to do in the open world. The key to having an open world game is not just to have a giant area. The key is to make the world feel alive and to give the player something to do. Random world events, things to collect, secrets to find and so forth. For the most part, MGS5 has nothing. It's just a big space full of nothing. Sure, you can pick up flowers and send them back to base. You can trank animals and send those back to base. And you might see an enemy driving from one outpost to the other. But none of this adds to or enhances the gameplay. And how much development effort went into creating a world like this? I don't know, but if you cut out all of that, and then just leave this, just the bases and their immediate surroundings, you would once have a game with much more focus, if you ask me. It's not like you generally go from one mission to the next anyway. Outside of the optional side missions, you almost always go back to the main base, and then end up flying in for the next mission, so why is the game open world? The reason I'm focusing on this so much is that MGS5 feels like an incomplete game. There are things that they showed in the trailers for the game that are not in the game. Cut content will always exist, but you don't always feel it. But in MGS5, you feel it. The game's second part feels very rushed and very incomplete, and it sours the experience that starts off so promising. And it is in my opinion that the game would have turned out much better if we had a linear, mission-based structure and just cut out the open world elements. Just cut out all that stuff between the bases. We don't need it, and I'm not even sure who would want that, as I imagine most players will ignore the open world as well. Because as mentioned, there's nothing to do in the open world. It simply serves as a means of getting from A to B, and you have much better ways of getting from A to B. My other major complaint is with the story and the narrative of MGS5. I mentioned how the ending and latter parts of the game feel rushed and incomplete, and that is an issue. Metal Gear Solid games have been rather infamous for their huge exposition dumps where cutscenes would go on and on and on. Metal Gear Solid 4, for example, ended the game with an hour's worth of cutscene at the very least. MGS5 tries to do something different. We don't have the huge expo dumps anymore, where a character will just ramble on and on about something while Snake repeats every third word in his usual bemused, quizzical fashion. And it's nice that they've tried to streamline the story, but they've gone too far in the opposite direction. And I do feel that it's tied in with the issue of the open world. Open world games are generally RPGs wherein you create your character, or, in a different sense, games where you have lots of ways to progress. Even if you're not building up your character whilst walking around the open world, maybe you're taking down one base after the other and you're getting some sort of permanent progress. You don't really get that in MGS5. But back to the issue of creating your character. That is true in MGS5. Snake, the main character, rarely speaks in this game, and the intent, I believe, is so you can self-insert as him. In a way, you are Snake. He is the representation of the player, a silent protagonist along the lines of Link, say. Only, he does talk. He can talk, it's just that a lot of the time, he doesn't talk, which results in some very awkward moments wherein he just stands there staring at someone as they talk to him, not actually saying anything in return. Is that really what we want from a game? I don't think so. I think players enjoy the chance to make up their own mind, whether it's in Dark Souls, where the player character is entirely silent and their responses are all imagined by the player, or in Mass Effect, where you shape the tone of your character's response. But in MGS5, we have a strange hybrid of a character who we are supposed to self-insert as, and yet sometimes he will make decisions that might be the opposite of what we would have had them do. It creates a disconnect between the player and the player character, which is a problem. The solution? Either make Snake an actual character who interacts with others and has his own personality, or completely let us control him. Don't go half one way and half the other, as it causes problems, such as this. I mentioned how the story has gone too far in the other way. The story is too light, if anything. The main villain's presence is barely felt throughout the game, and the tone is all over the place, which leads me to my next issue with the plot. And beware, there are perhaps minimal spoilers here. The advertising for MGS5 on multiple accounts used the term "the missing link" in the Metal Gear franchise. It implied that the story of MGS5 would focus on the downfall of Big Boss, the hero of Metal Gear Solid 3, who would go on to become the antagonist of the early Metal Gear games. This isn't really the case. The trailers misrepresented the game, and the actual plot here is strange and, at times, barely feels like it's connected to the rest of the franchise. Now, strange is the norm for Metal Gear Solid, but fans wanted answers, and newcomers to the series are not even receiving a standalone coherent story, so who exactly is benefiting from this? We could have had a great story about what drives a man to such extreme measures, the fine line between freedom fighter and terrorist, but we don't. The trailers tell a more interesting story than the game itself. It's immensely frustrating, not to mention that there's no real conclusion. The story just sort of stops, as if they ran out of steam, or likely ran out of time and budget and had to cut a lot of content, which is all but confirmed at this point in time. A more specific issue is the character Revolver Ocelot. In this game, he's boring. He was extravagant in all the other Metal Gear Solid games, one of my favourite characters actually, but there's no "I love the feeling of slamming a long silver bullet into a well-greased chamber" here. There's no "I love to reload during a battle." In fact, there's virtually no character to him. He's just there. Many of the characters lack characterization, bizarrely enough, which is extremely weird in a game series so known for its colourful, over-the-top characters. There isn't much in the way of Metal Gear Solid bizarreness here in general. Thanks to the tone being all over the place, at times it feels like it's trying to be very dark and serious, but a lot of that falls flat, unfortunately. There are a few moments where we get that unique Metal Gear brand of bizarre comedy, just not enough of it. That about covers it for my major complaints, but there's a few more aspects I want to touch on. And now this is a strange issue, but in a way the game offers too much freedom. You have dozens of ways to approach your objectives, but the game does not really necessitate them, nor does it reward you for doing so, and in some ways it actually punishes you for trying to take advantage of the countless tools at your disposal. Why would you use all the exciting items if they limit your score and your rank? Why would you use the very expensive items when the cheaper ones often work just as well in terms of efficiency and effectiveness? It's a little puzzling, to be honest. Sure, you could go with this ultra elaborate and expensive setup for a mission, or you could just run in with the Trank sniper rifle and clear the place out very efficiently. A game with so many options should reward the player for taking advantage of them. I don't think MGS5 does, if I'm being honest. Now, I can't talk much about the online aspects of the game, as Metal Gear Online is currently not available. It's launching in a few weeks, and there are other online aspects too, such as the FOB, Forward Operating Base, wherein you build a base and other players can invade it to steal your goodies, and you can likewise retaliate against them. I have not been able to get this to actually work, so I can't talk about it. And my last real complaint is that the game lacks co-op. Co-op would have justified the open world, I think, and co-op play in general in this game would be amazing because the gameplay is so damn solid. No pun intended. On that note though, let's move on to the positive aspects of the game, shall we? First up, of course, the gameplay. Metal Gear Solid 5 feels great to play, it feels polished. The controls are perhaps not the most conventional if you're used to Western shooters, but they click, and it all works. The gameplay feels tight and responsive, perhaps helped by the fact that the game runs at 60 frames per second. Very nice fact in an atmosphere where many devs are satisfied with 30. Now don't get me wrong, I can play 30 FPS games and it doesn't really bother me at all, but I do appreciate 60 frames per second when it shows up. There are many ways to approach the game. Let's take one mission for example. My goal was to eliminate a target who was holed up in an airport base, and my way of IDing him would be that he's going to be giving an arms dealer a tour of the base. So from there's a lot of ways to go about it. Do I find a vantage point outside the base and hunker down with a long-range rifle, waiting for him to poke his head out so that I can drop him in one shot and make a quick getaway? Or do I sneak into the base, planting C4 on the communications devices and the power grids, providing both a handy distraction if I need to divert a guard's attention, and also crippling the base's defences? Then do I kill the target and the arms dealer? Well, on my first playthrough of that mission I was sneaking around inside the base, just sort of making a map of it in my mind. Then I turned a corner and just happened to bump into the two of them. Fortunately for me, they happened to be out of sight of snipers and other guards at that moment, so I took advantage of the situation and clobbered them both senseless before extracting them alive. Point is, you have a lot of freedom in how you want to tackle objectives. Although the game does lean towards non-lethal and stealth, you can simply run in and shoot everyone. The game has a huge selection of weapons which can be customized to your liking. And not only are they guns of many varieties, you also have tools and gadgets that can be a lot of fun to play around with too. Got a mission to eliminate some tanks? You don't have to just roll in there and blow them up with a rocket launcher. You could plant some mines on the path that they're taking, or you could do what I like doing, put something on the road in front of them, whether it's getting your horse or dog to wait there, or just leaving a cardboard box. When they roll up to investigate and then pause, take that chance to run up and stick some C4 on the tank, or just extract it then and there. So yes, the gameplay is great, which does relate to my earlier point about the co-op. This game with co-op would be so good, because the synergy between two characters would work perfectly. Sadly, there's none of that. Instead, we have a buddy system wherein we can take non-player characters with us on missions to assist us in some ways. Some might be more offensive, others more for support, and others simply help you get around faster. But they all feel useful in their own ways. Although considering none of them can talk, I find that a bit disappointing. Maybe that's just me, but I like banter. And that also ties in with my earlier issue of Snake being, well, so quiet. There was quite some controversy around Snake's English voice actor being replaced, but I don't really mind all that much. That is, I don't have any problems with Kiefer Sutherland's portrayal of Snake. I think he does a good job for the most part. It doesn't help that practically the first line we ever heard him say was like, "She survived," in a really garbled way, but his performance is pretty good. There's just so little of it. If you're getting talent like that, why wouldn't you use it as much as you can? There are times when I feel like I'm starting to like the character, but then it goes back to him just being silent and just stands there off in the corner staring at people. But the voice acting in general is fairly good, as expected of the franchise. It wouldn't be Metal Gear Solid without some really bizarre writing though. Likewise, the graphics and visuals are great. Faces look realistic without getting into Uncanny Valley, and the movements are all authentic looking for the most part. It's always a delight to see the CQC in cutscenes. The game performs well too. I noticed some frame dropping, but for the most part I feel like it's stuck to its 60 frames per second target. The only real complaint I can bring up performance-wise is that some of the shadows are really jaggy and ugly looking on the PS4 version. How about the soundtrack then? The game features quite a few real songs from the 80s. As for the original soundtrack, it didn't stand out too much to me. That is to say, I rarely found myself noticing it. That can be a good thing and a bad thing, but in this sense I think it's probably a good thing. There are music and audio cues to let you know that enemies are nearby. As they sort of get closer, the music gets more intense and so forth. And the game's theme tune, Sins of the Father, is pretty good, although its inclusion in the actual game comes off as a bit unnatural, a bit forced. I mean, they could have found a much better place to play it, is what I'm trying to say. Story-wise, the overall plot isn't all that great. There are moments that shine during the narrative, largely at the beginning and ending of the game. It's just that much that happens in between is not so great. There is one particular moment near the end of the game that is sure to disturb you in one way or another. When the game takes advantage of storytelling techniques that you can only pull off in a video game, that's when it is at its best. If only we had more of it. I think that about covers it though, so to summarise my thoughts on MGS5, gameplay is good, open world design is flawed and unnecessary, story is underwhelming and full of filler, but it does have its moments, just needs more of them. Presentation is strong overall, with good performance, graphics, audio and so forth. I don't believe I experienced any glitches or bugs during my 70 hours of play, at least none so far. And in addition to that, the game is disappointing from a narrative standpoint and does not live up to the promise of being the missing link. I don't feel like I'm coming away from the story going, ah, this all makes sense now, you know? That said, I hope this review doesn't come across too negative for all that. I did enjoy the game, I wouldn't have put 70 hours into it otherwise. Just when I review things, I tend to focus on the negative, as those are the important aspects to critique. The aspects that need to be improved upon. Or to put it another way, I only complain because I care. Then, to finish up, what would I score the game out of 10? I don't know, perhaps an 8? I'm really not a fan of giving numerical scores. Either way, I hope this review was helpful, or at least in some way entertaining. Metal Gear Solid 5 Phantom Pain, can I recommend it? Yes, it's a game of high quality overall and I enjoyed it. Let me know what you think of the game in the comments, but try not to post any spoilers if you can avoid it. You take care. Ciao.
Thank you, boss! Give us a development.